I will be reading from Hebrews 2:10-18. In bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. Both the one who makes men holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. He says, "I will declare your name to my brothers. In the presence of the congregation, I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in him." And again he says, "Here am I, and the children God has given me. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he may become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted."
Good morning. God with us. I heard this description from a man recovering from being an alcoholic. As people, as humans, we build this mountain of man-made problems. Higher and higher it goes. Then we put God behind this mountain. We stand in front of this mountain, looking around, asking, "Where is God? Why is he not helping me with this mountain of problems?" We can't see God through a mountain. What can ever be seen through a mountain? It is only when we put God in front of our problems, in front of our mountain, and tell our problems how big our God is, that we can face our problems and start to overcome our mountain. As we are coming out of a time of Advent, we are leaving a time when the name Emmanuel is used as much or more than the name of Jesus. Of course, we all know that Emmanuel means God with us. But why is it that Christians only remind ourselves of this fact for 1 month out of the year? Why do we spend 11 months out of 12 calling Jesus by every other name, and then lament about feeling distant from God, or asking, "God, where are you?" Revelations 3:20, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." To the very end of the Bible, God is saying, "I'm here. Here I am." So many people are searching for God, but God is saying, "Here I am." God does not make us search. Humans create that mountain and that search. Now, we all know that there were some questionable names given to children in the Bible. Abram was a big offender of this. Mash, Uz, Hul, Gether, and these pronunciations are probably not even close. When God sent his son, he specifically gave a reminder of where God is. And what is most likely, this is not a verified fact, by the way, but what is most likely the first instance of a celebrity giving their child a unique name, God chose Emmanuel, God with us. He is with us. He is beside us. He is in front of us. He is behind us. He is above us, and he will wait patiently behind our man-made mountain until we put him in front, and let him walk us over the rough terrain that we have created for ourselves. Please pray with me. Emmanuel, God with us. As we start a new week and a new year, help us to put you in front of our mountains. Help us to remember that you encompass the universe. You, God, are not just with us sitting in this building, but you are with everyone around the world. Remind us that others may need help putting you in front of their mountains. Thank you for sending your Son, Emmanuel. Amen.
Matthew 2:13 through 23. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream.
Get up and take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him.
So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet.
Out of Egypt I called my son.
When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled.
A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more.
After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said,
Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead.
So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene.
Wow, looks a lot different with all those seats filled. In Matthew 2, as we've just heard, Jesus escapes his original attempt at persecution. Here's a guy who hasn't even done anything yet, simply been born. He, somehow escapes it, and in Herod's attempt, he kills an entire 2 years worth of the population. Story sounds familiar. We hear it all the time. It wouldn't be a Christian Christmas if we didn't hear it at least once. But what we can think about when we hear that kind of story, and whether we think it sounds familiar or not, is the story of us, the story of the Anabaptists, the story of the Mennonites. Where does that come from? We hear, the story of Jesus' persecution over and over and over again, but we forget almost where we come from sometimes. But we don't have to. We have a great book about it. It used to be found on a lot of shelves, libraries, family homes, that sort of thing. If we think about persecution in a different style and think about it other than Jesus's, we can very easily relate to it, whether we realize it or not. See, looking way back in history, we have this book and all the stories already assembled. It's right there in front of us. The book, some of you may know or some of you may not know, is called, let me get the full title here. The Bloody Theater, or Martyrs' Mirrors, of the defenseless Christians who baptized only upon confession of faith and who suffered and died from the testimony of Jesus, their Savior, from the time of Christ to the year AD 1660, compiled from various authentic chronicles, memorials, and testimonies. When our ancestors were originally having these confessions of faith and these thoughts and that sort of thing, they were persecuted. That's no hidden secret. But what we don't realize is many of the traditions we have today stem back from that. We forget that they were literally chased all around Europe, everywhere. Germany, Holland, Switzerland, and eventually here. They weren't able to carry everything with them. They weren't able to carry musical instruments. They didn't even have a place to put a pipe organ. So what they did carry was they carried a few blankets, maybe some extra clothes, and they carried this book. Not everybody had a Bible. Bibles were rare. The Catholic Church had a market on them, and they kept it pretty close. They didn't let anybody have them. They didn't want anybody disagreeing with them. But they also carried some other things. Carried a couple books. They carried this one, if they had it. Maybe it wasn't published yet. So they carried the letters and correspondence that everybody had sent to each other beforehand, outlining their confessions and their ideas and their songs and that sort of thing. But they also carried another book. Now, this isn't it, but it's similar. It kind of has the same purpose and same use, but carried something called the Osbon. Now, the Osbon was a book of songs compiled and continually compiled over time. The first 11 were actually written in prison in a castle in, I have it here in my notes somewhere. I think it's Pachow Castle. And there was 11 songs written, and they were written over 5 years while they were in prison, and they eventually died there. Somehow they snuck them out, and that started, the tradition of singing out of simply a book. No instruments, no fanfare, just the voices. So they threw the Osbon, they threw letters, books, whatever else, into a chest. They threw it in the back of a wagon. That's why we have blanket chests. That's where they come from. So they were, they moved. They kept going from town to town to town. But almost every time, eventually, some ruling family, some ruling government would come along and they'd persecute them. They'd chase them out, or they'd attempt to. And each and every time, they'd try and set an example. They'd try and use at least one. Now, Martyr's Mirror is exactly that. It's all the stories. And to be exact, I can't give a good description of the book better than the book can give a description of itself. Martyr's Mirror is a record of the path of the early martyrs. The price of their own life, limbs, and blood was a gift they gladly gave to preserve what they believed to be a pure faith and the true gospel of Jesus Christ. Tortures, persecutions, and sufferings were endured with a fortitude and heroism that is unparalleled in history. Here is a collection of counts of more than 4,011 people burned at the stake, of countless bodies torn on the rack, torn tongues, ears, hands, feet, gouged eyes, people buried alive, crucifixions, beheadings, stonings, drownings, smotherings, whippings, and people dying in dungeons. Stories of songs, letters, prayers, and confessions of many who were willing to bear the cross of persecution and death for a faith which followed the New Testament teachings. 4,011. That's a lot. That is a lot of people. Almost all of them killed. One of them is named Dirk Willems. Now, we see this in a poster form a lot. You see it if you visit Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society. I'm sure it's hanging in a lot of classrooms at LMH. But do we know the story? Do we know where it comes from? Well, I have it here. Now, I'm going to start a little bit in and get to the bulk of the story. But, there's some background information here that's missed, obviously, that Dirk is one of these people who, has different convictions than the Catholic faith and the ruler of his town at the time. And it says, concerning his apprehension, it is stated by trustworthy persons that when he fled, he was hotly pursued by a thief catcher. And as there had been some frost, said Dirk Willems ran before over the ice, getting across with considerable peril. The thief catcher, following him, broke through when Dirk Willems, perceiving that the former was in danger of his life, quickly returned and aided him in getting out, and thus saved his life. The thief catcher wanted to let him go, but the burgomaster very certainly called him to consider his oath, and thus he was again seized by the thief catcher, and at said place, after severe imprisonment and great trials preceding him, the deceitful Papist, put to the death at a lingering fire by these bloodthirsty, ravening wolves, enduring it with great steadfastness, and confirming the genuine faith of the truth, which his death and blood, as an instructive example to all pious Christians of the time, and to the everlasting disgrace of tyrannous Papists. There's a story of the image many of us always know, see, but might not know about. It's probably one of the most famous because it's such a highly publicized image, highly talked about story, that here's this guy who turned around, went back, and saved someone who was trying to imprison him and kill him. Now, what this part of the story doesn't mention, but some of the other accounts of the story mention, is the only reason he actually made it across the ice in the first place is because he was starved for so long in prison and was a skinny rag and weighed less than everybody else at the time. So obviously it's a good idea and good explanation as to why it happened, but think about that. I mean, would anybody else do that nowadays? There's another story that, maybe you don't feel a connection for whatever reason. You've never seen the image before. You've never heard of Dirk Willems, anything like that, which is understandable. Okay, we can all relate to different things for different reasons, and, everything's more impactful when we can relate to something. So for those of you, I have another story here, and this one is similar. It's about a letter that was written. It's actually part of a letter that was written. And this individual's name is Hans Landis. Now, I know there's a lot of Landises, or at least people with Landis backgrounds in the audience. And if you've never heard the story, it is another interesting one because, getting back to genealogy a little bit, most of the descendants and original Landis settlers of Lancaster County are ancestors of Hans Landis. Hans Landis was one of the last martyrs, and was one of the ones that influenced the most to immigrate to America. But the story reads, continuing, he speaks of his personal appearance and the manner of his death, saying, Hans Landis was a tall, stately person with a long black and gray beard and a manful voice. When he, cheerful of good courage, was led out by a rope, the Wolfstadt being the place made ready for his execution, the executioner, Mr. Paul Volmar, dropped the rope, lifting up both his hands to heaven, spoke these words, Oh, that God, to whom I make my complaint, might have compassion that you, Hans, have come into my hands in this manner. Forgive me, for God's sake, that which I must do to you." Hans Landis comforted the executioner, saying that he had already forgiven him. God would forgive him too, that he well knew that he had to execute the order of the authorities. He should not be afraid and see that there was no hindrance in his way. Thereupon he was beheaded. After his head had been struck off, the executioner asked, "Lord Bailiff of the empire, have I executed this man rightly according to imperial law and sentence?" Otherwise, it was customary to say, "This poor fellow," etc., as though he believed that he had died saved and rich. The people were of the opinion that the executioner, by dropping the rope, meant to indicate that he should run away. It was also generally said that if he had run away, no one would have followed him to stop him. So far the aforementioned extract. Further statement. It is also appropriate to give here what has been stated to us through credible testimony, namely, that when the aforementioned Hans Landis was standing in the place of execution to be put to death, his dear wife and children came to him with mournful crying and lamentation to take a last and final adieu and leave from him. But when he saw them, he requested them to go away from him in order that his good resolution and tranquility of heart for the death awaiting him might not be disturbed or taken away by their weeping and grief, which having been done, and he having condemned his soul into the hands of God, the quickly descending stroke of the sword put an end to his life. That's 2 out of 4,011. History on the book itself could be written. See, there's a number of editions that have been printed. There was editions in Europe, but in 1745, there was a group of Mennonites who came to Ephrata, to the Ephrata cloister, which was the location at the time of a large printing operation, actually one of the largest in the Americas at the time. And all the German-speaking people had a need for, a new copy of Martyr's Mirror. And they agreed to publish another edition, but the problem was each edition before that was in Dutch. It was from Holland. So they decided to translate it into German, and which was a major undertaking. The person who translated it claimed that he only got 3 or 4 hours a night during the time of translating because he was working on it so hard and everything, and it took him that long. It took 3 years to assemble the whole project and publish everything, but anyways, it was the largest book at the time printed in the Americas. Right here in Lancaster County, right in Ephrata, right down the road. And one of the interesting things is that it was a business flop. Even though they did all this work to translate this book and print it and assemble all the paper and everything, it didn't sell. They had a ton of leftover copies. So, right about the time of the Revolutionary War, right before the battles of Brandywine and Germantown, supplies were running thin. And there's different accounts of the story, different recordings, different passed down histories and that sort of thing. But somehow, members of the Revolutionary Army traveled up the Horseshoe Pike, which is now 322, from the Philadelphia area, and what they needed was things for their gun wadding. They thought paper would be a good choice, obviously, and either different versions of the stories go different. Either they stumbled upon the cloister, they were sent to the cloister, either way. But they got there and they found all these editions of the Mirror that didn't sell. They were unbound, but still there and printed nonetheless. And so they wanted to take them, they wanted to use them for the army. Well, obviously that wasn't too fitting for the ideas of the members of the cloister. So they ended up paying full price for all the leftover editions. They loaded them up, took them down there, back to Brandywine, Philadelphia, somewhere around there, and different versions of the story go different ways again, but some say they ended up using them at the battles of Brandywine and Germantown as rifle wadding. Very ironic that a Anabaptist pacifist book would be used in battle, but it's an interesting part. Anyways, one version of the story goes that they got so tore up about this that they stopped. They stopped using it. They didn't feel comfortable using it anymore. They got a guilty conscience. Anyways, somehow there was some left over by the time they were done using them. There's still copies of this day that are etched in them, present in Brandywine or something along those lines. I think it's about 5, 6, 7 copies that are floating around out there. But either way, somehow, there's still copies that survived that made that journey. Whether they made it back to the cloister to get bound or they were bound somewhere else, doesn't matter. But the fact that this book, not the Bible, not the gospel, but this book about everybody's struggles made somebody think twice about what they were about to do is really interesting, at least to me. Now, yeah, we can talk about this all day long and everything like that, but what does it matter? Well, I was having a conversation between a few friends one time, and one of them happened to be someone who was raised Amish but never joined the church. And the question was posed to him, why didn't you join the church? He said, well, obviously the Amish have many traditions and do things very differently. But a lot of them can't tell you why. Simply because we'll just do what we've always done, because. He couldn't understand why he should join the church and do things so differently just because it was something someone always did before him. We're just as vulnerable here for the same thing to happen. If we don't answer or teach or answer these questions before they're asked, many people might be afraid to ask. What happens when we're asked or confronted about being a real Mennonite because we don't drive a horse and buggy or a black car? While discussing the divisions of the church might break open old wounds and are something we might like to forget, that opportunity to discuss the gospel with someone and why we believe what we do is an opportunity that can't be passed up or a responsibility that should be passed on to someone else. What kind of water does our faith hold if its so-called faithful can't even explain it themselves? Most of the answers to the questions are right here in this book. Why do we sing a cappella hymns? Why do a lot of our families hold on to old blanket chests and maybe even the blankets themselves simply because? Why are we different from the Joe Wangers and the Hornings and the Amish and the Brethren and everyone else who's different from us, but yet the same? Who was Menno Simons and everyone who followed him, or rather, everyone he followed? We can answer the Christian questions very easily because this book is the most printed book in the world. It's everywhere. Everyone has one. People who don't share our faith and denomination have one. You know, you can walk down the street, you can knock on a door, I'm sure somebody can find one for you at any given time. But not everybody has this. We have this. This is our book. This tells our story. This explains where we came from. This explains why we are Mennonite, who the Anabaptists were. If we don't keep this up, what's going to happen? We're going to forget who we are. We're going to forget why we do things the way we do. Does that mean we're going to go the way of other churches that once might have been powerhouses in their districts, such as Landis Valley, or some of those other churches that used to be huge and used to have congregations upwards of 300 and 400 people, that now dwindle down to 100, maybe even less? You can buy yourself, your family, or a wedding gift copy, as commonly was done, of Martyr's Mirrors by stopping in at Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society and visiting Rolando Santiago, who I'm sure can also point you in the directions of the archives downstairs that have been compiled by Ira Landis, who used to be a preacher at Landis Valley, and can answer most of these questions if you can't find them here in this book. If you don't feel like going and braving the traffic at Tanger Outlets on a Saturday, I'm sure you can buy one online on their website. Or if you don't even feel like spending the money, which that question can be answered right here in this book too, you can find the free edition online, every last part of it, simply by a Google search.